Hello, everyone. My name is Oleksandr, and I'm a senior staff mobile engineer at Tide and a GDE in Flutter and Dart. And I'm not an expert in functional programming. For almost 10 years, I work as a cross-platform mobile developer. And during this period of time, I've created a few mobile apps in F# and learned from that experience. But I'm not sure that I'm the guy who should teach you what Functor is, though that's simple. We don't have real functional programming structures in Dart, so let's not focus on them today at all. I promise. We will not have any dark magic. Instead, we will have a really simple talk. I will try not to use scary words like monad, applicative, or functor. We will talk about regular classes and plain old functions instead. In a few minutes, we will create a fake functional programming library. Why fake? Well, because there will be no monads or functors there. But that library will be real enough for you to use in your code, and it might be a good starting point for moving forward with the concept. So here is our agenda for today. We will talk about nullable and discuss when null is not working. We will find a way how to fix this, and then we will make our solution usable and even apply it in the real app. So let's code. Here I have a project with the app and the F fake library package. Let's focus on that package first. It has an empty src folder and no dependencies except the standard ones. When I learn something, sometimes I use Dartpad because it's awesome, but sometimes I use tests. And let's use tests today. But we will write tests not for the purpose of test coverage, but just for having a convenient way of our ideas validation. I will use a presentation body for today for typing, just to save us some time. And to have some context, let's maybe create a class somewhere inside the test. Whoa, cancel. Somewhere inside the test folder. Let it be a person class. So each person should have a name, and we will have a function that returns a person by ID. Simple, right? So now we may create a test that validates that we understand how our function works. We'll create a person test file with a simple test. In that test, simple get person test. In that test, we will invoke our function with just some random ID, and we expect that this test should pass. Yeah, passed. That's great. That's a good starting point, right? But the reality is a bit more unpredictable. Let's say that we have one additional function. Well, let's assume that we cannot get the info for every second person. Like that. Awesome. Let's write a test for this function then. A new test, it's like almost real get person, and we need to validate that person is still there. We cannot use the name value straight from that function because it might be null, so we use that question mark there. And we expect that for ID2, it will be null. By the way, which type would you expect name and name2 variables have? I would expect them to be strings, or maybe some nullable of strings. Let's check that. You know what? Name2 will have a type null. That means that integer might be equal to a string. How cool is that? Well, this problem is not specific to Dart. C#, for example, would behave the same way. And anyway, I'm not such a big fan of dynamics and casts, so that should not cause us any problems, and I can live with that. Let's continue. You might have already noticed that I have an additional file there in the test folder. That file contains another getPerson function implementation. Let's pretend that this is some third-party implementation of our very own getPerson function. I don't know that implementation, but I can cover it with tests. So let's import it and write the same tests for this third option of our function then. So I assume that it behaves the same way as getPerson too. All right, seems like it behaves as before. Nice. Let's maybe try ID 3. Maybe it will be null, maybe not. Whoa, exception. Why? Well, because I can, says that implementation. All right, in some, like, how can I know that this method might return an exception? In some languages, exceptions are described in the function signature. Dart doesn't support this, for good. But okay, I will just stop complaining and just handle that exception. All right, so test paths, we handled that scenario when a function returns a value. We handled scenario when a function returned null and when it fails with the exception. I don't think that this function will be able to surprise us anymore, right? Wrong. What if the value would be 4? We assumed that this function might throw an exception, but instead it threw an error. All right, so that's how you can handle this case. And now it should work. Okay, just to wrap up, we have 4 different cases that we need to handle in the real app. Of course, I cannot express enough what a glorious advantage it is to have null safety. But having null safety does not prevent all these errors. We still need to handle all possible cases. What can we do differently? Just to simplify our lives. Well, look, we already return multiple values from getPerson2 and getPerson3 functions. So we may create a wrapper for these functions, catch all exceptions there, and return null when something goes wrong. But in that case, we lose the possibility to handle errors because we will stay with just the fact that something went wrong. So we cannot really return multiple values. GetPerson returns a person. GetPerson2 returns a wrapped person. That's what Dart allows us with null safety. But what if we will create our own version of null safety? We have wrappers for types. What if we'll create, like, for example, we will create a wrapper for a person. Let's maybe call it maybe or maybe option. Well, yeah, let it be option then. So I will create a new file, option, and a new type. The implementation would be trivial. We have an abstract class that's what is our wrapper. And we have 2 subclasses. The first one will keep some value. It's like the value of nullable type when it is not null. And the second one will be our own implementation of null. Great. So we know how to create good packages. So we need to export our option class because it's private for the package now, and we will do the same for all other classes we have. And yeah, let's maybe port getPerson3 to getPerson2 to getPerson2 option implementation. We will import our new library, and we'll create a new implementation for a getPerson2, but instead we will return an option. Not so much was changed, right? By good tradition, let's write a test. Or you know what? Maybe I can maybe I can have an option class here just for the convenience, just for without breakpoints, like that. All right. So let's write a test. Import a new package and write a test. So now I cannot get the person value straight from the getPerson to option output, right? And that's good. I need to check that the value is there first. But have you noticed that I missed an else statement here? I would prefer the compiler to force me to write an else statement, the same as it forced me to unwrap a nullable type. So let's maybe change the option type just a bit. We will add a new function. Let's call it fold. The purpose of that function would be to call another function. Do you feel that breeze of functional programming, right? If the value is null, I mean none, then if none function will be called. And if we have some value, we will call if some. All right. Now we may update our tests with the following code. Like that. All right, I totally love it. Now the compiler forces me to check both cases. And by the way, we may create wrappers of wrappers now. Let's port getPerson3 function. We wanted to have a wrapper on a wrapper of a person. And in this particular case, there will be 3 places where something might go wrong. So we need to have a wrapper of a wrapper of wrapper of a person. Oh, and I didn't show you getPerson3 implementation before. So, well, here it is. And here is the updated version. Yeah, and here is the updated version. The last line really scares me, but okay, let's write a test. So we unwrap the first error, and if it's not error, then we unwrap the second value, and if it's not an error, we unwrap the third value, and if there were no errors, then we may expect the value. Well, this is horrible. There must be another way of dealing with multiple errors, but important thing here for the future. Notice that there is always a single successful path. At the end of all chains of functions, there is always a single value, and it's the error that changes all the time, right? So let's say that when our option holds a value, then this is the value for a successful path. In our case, that would be a person object. But instead of none or empty value, let's store an error object in the none section. So it will still be like an option type. Let's maybe start coding it, but with just a tiny change. It's either holds a value or error. And yeah, good name. Let's call it either. The code is almost identical to option here, right? Instead of some class, we will have right class, which is the right value. And instead of none, we will have a left value now. So yeah, here is our left value is coming. They are the same, right and left, right? We just distinguish it for convenience. Okay, now we may refactor getPerson3 function and create getPerson3 either version. So now we have the information on what went wrong, and not just some agreements on wrappers, on options. Like that. Alrighty. Well, maybe I will put either here instead. Good. By good tradition, let's write a test. Get person 3 either, so we call in that function, and we unwrap it like that. And the test passed. Awesome. This sounds like a great start for a fake functional programming package. Let's see how it might be applied in the real app. And for a fake library, I wrote a fake weather app. Let me show you the app first. Here is how it looks like. It's just a single-page application with an entry field. I can type any city here, for example, Kyiv. And it says that currently it's -7 degrees in Kyiv. Well, what about Oslo? Okay, what about maybe Kharkiv, that's the city? Well, something went wrong. So that happens. And the temperature changes in Kharkiv really fast. So yeah, here how it looks like. And let's maybe look at the code. Here it is. So it's a single page app. It looks like that. We have an API class somewhere, and it's not really the case how it's implemented, but here how we generate the weather. And the important stuff here, like just keep in mind that sometimes it might fail. I used qubit with just a single method that emits a loading state, call a service to get a weather, and then emits a new state again. We have two model files, the first one with exception models for the service, and the second one is with weather model itself. And the most important class for today, the service class. We don't need other classes. All right, so here is our service class. You can see that I threw exceptions from it a lot, because what else I can do? And let's start maybe with just a minor change. I will use an either class I just wrote to return multiple values from here. So I will import our fake library and just change the return values from throwing exceptions to returning left, like the wrong value. All right, so we changed the return type, and now we need to fix the qubit. Let me open it maybe first. You can see that we have an error here, and we have that try-catch block because initially our service threw errors. Let's maybe change the implementation like that. So we may get rid of try-catch block and use the default function to get values here. All right, I like it. But what's wrong with our service? Look one more time at the get weather implementation. The purpose of that method is to return weather. But while reading it, you constantly see things that have little in common with the final goal. It's like a story that constantly interrupts with non-important details. Look, to get the weather, we need to check that the city is not empty. Oh, by the way, if it is, we need to return a city is blank weather service error. Okay, yeah. So if the city name contains only valid symbols, by the way, if it does not, we need to return non-valid symbol weather service error. Like, come on, how can we stay focused on what is important and ignore what is not? Ideally, I would want it to look like that. When the city is not empty and all characters are valid in its name, return a weather, like that. To help me with that, I will create 2 more classes. Let's return to our fake library. And yeah, so we need to create 2 more classes. The first one will be a wrapper for a function that returns either. We may call synchronous operations and IO operations, so that class name would be IO either. And it's just a simple class that holds a function that returns either. And while we're here, let's add the second class as well. And it will be pretty much similar to IO either, but instead it will be a holder, a wrapper that returns a future of either. So for a function that returns a future of either. We will call asynchronous operations as tasks, hence that class name would be task either. All right. And again, while we are here, I will add a helper function for the IO either class. It's just an additional constructor that will get some value and a function that may validate that value in parameters. And if that function returns true, it returns either right. If false, either left. Here how it looks like. You see, a value, a predicate, and some fallback value. So if predicate is true, we are returning right. If it's false, then we are returning left. Alrighty, back to our service. Let's start with the refactoring of the getWeather function. First, I will extract first 2 conditions into separate functions, like that. So the first one function will return IO either, and it's validate that the city is not empty, and we use that IO either from predicate function we just created, like that. And the second one will validate characters. All right. So we already used the first function here in the method body, like final op is not empty. So we need to unwrap it with the fold function and return from that function if the value is left, like the wrong one, the exception, or continue invocation if the value is right. And following this approach will, if we will follow this approach, we will get pretty much the same code as before. So there is a better way. We will use another technique instead. Let's write a function for the IO either that will get another IO either as a parameter. And then if the current IO either has the wrong left value, return it. And if the current value is right, then it will pass to the next IO either, like that. We will call it flat map. So here is a function that returns IO either. And, well, I promised you not to have some dark magic. Well, maybe just a tiny bit. Like that. That might look scary, but you will get it when you will see how we use that function. And we use it like that. Now we may chain different IO either instances. All right, we have a function that takes 2 synchronous operations on eithers and return a new IO either. What about asynchronous operations? Let's write a helper constructor first. It will do error handling for asynchronous operations. So we will need a try-catch block here. Come on. We'll create a new task either, try-catch block here. And we will do error handling for asynchronous operations there. So if the operation succeeds, then we will return right, otherwise left. And so working with these operations will be like that. Like we can return task either and fetch weather from service. Like that. So if something goes wrong, we will return something went wrong error. And yeah, Everything is good, except we cannot chain that function because we need to pass an IOizer to our flat map function. So let's create a really special version of the flat map. It will return task_izer. We will call it flat map task, and instead of IOizer, we will pass a task_izer to that function instead. It looks pretty much like flat map, but just works with futures, with asynchronous code. Back to our service. Now we may complete the implementation like that. All right. What I don't really like here is that we have a nice chain of functions, but we have a different syntax for the first function. And it doesn't sound like when the city is empty, but it's more like when is not empty city. I don't like that. We may create a tiny extension on the object to make it sound right. Like that, extension on the object. We will call it pipe. And we'll just provide a function and call that function on an object. How can we use that pipe? Like that. All right, so we've built types that make it possible for us to use railway-oriented programming, which is quite a powerful technique. And unfortunately, I have no time to make a proper introduction to it, but the idea is just in front of your eyes. We are focusing on a successful path and making it easy to read the code like if it will always succeed. At the same time, we force ourselves to handle all errors on each and every step. We're doing this by making a chain of function calls and return multiple values on all steps. You don't have to write those classes by yourselves all the time. Of course, if you're afraid of adding third-party libraries, then you can improve those classes a bit and use them in your real apps. But I would recommend you use an fp-dart library instead. So let me close that and just a dependency, fp-dart. Like that. So I can just comment out my version and import fp-dart. Whoa, such a wonderful coincidence. Our API matched the API from the library. I still have a thing or two to show you, even for this basic talk, but I really want us to be able to chat also. So I will move to the end of my presentation, and if there will be no questions, we will be able to get back for a bonus topic. All right, back to slides. Next steps. Yeah, I know. Next steps. Yeah, read the fp-dart package documentation. It's easy to understand. Have a look at Dart's package too, as it's more popular, but has little to no documentation, unfortunately. Get yourself familiar with railway-oriented programming and start with little steps. I'm not an expert in functional programming, but I've noticed a huge boost in maintainability of my apps when I started using these techniques. And yeah, last but not least, consider using railway-oriented programming in your apps. Consider using functional programming patterns and structures in your internal packages. But please do not expect that many developers will know and will be familiar with that concepts. So we love Flutter for its simplicity. If you have a mature team, well, it's a crime not to use advanced techniques. But when you create something for the public, keep it simple. I will push a repository with the code shortly after this session finishes. You'll find it on my GitHub page. There will be a bit more than we talked about today. Unfortunately, we have covered just the beginning and have barely scratched the surface of functional programming. And the most interesting part I had to leave for you to learn on your own. But still, I'm very interested in your thoughts regarding this topic. So you might tag me in Twitter, write me a message on LinkedIn, or maybe let's have a chat right now on a small Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you, Oleksandr. Sorry, I thought your presentation was over. That's why I jumped in. But it was really interesting. And I'm not mute, right? Okay, good. This time I managed it. You hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I can hear you. You're not muted.
Well, in my personal projects, I'm using Darts, and I don't know. I like it. I know that many beginner developers start with Resocoder. I don't know. He has amazing tutorials. So he
Yeah.
also has this domain-driven design, like kind of a course. He also uses this Darts package. I personally like it, but for some reason, people when I like bring up, I don't know. I haven't brought that yet, but even in Android, when I was doing this Kotlin result, there's this result thing. People were not really like ready for it. People were skeptical about functional programming, switching to functional programming rather than like traditional try catch. And I like it. It's more readable, but I just want to know your opinion about how can you convince your team to use this functional programming.
Yeah, sure. Just a small note on Darts package. I really like it as well, but when you open a README file from that package, you'll see the first thing, like how can you learn functional programming? Well, go and buy a functional programming in Scala book, read it, and then get back to Darts package. Not the best user experience. Darts is awesome package, but still what I like in FP Dart instead is that they just have a really awesome, just perfect documentation. So everything is well documented there. And that's the reason I chose to follow API from FP Dart today and not Darts. And as for your question, how can I convince my colleagues? Well,
just to add that, another question is that do you use it actually at Tide?
I just joined Tide, so I cannot tell for sure, but I used all those techniques on my last 4 different projects, so for 4 different applications. And usually speakers, when they're speaking about some interesting stuff, they're saying, okay, that's how it should be, but I use only a tiny bit of that concept because of blah, 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 because of different reasons. I use much more than I just showed you on that presentation. So it's just the beginning. It's just the basics. And yeah, I use them a lot. I cannot say for Tide just
Okay,
for
how about convincing?
How about convincing? You should not convince anyone. You can just show why it might simplify things. Like you can create your very own version of maybe monad, like option or either. And I saw so many times in different applications, they create a result class. And when you will show them that, oh, by the way, do you know that you may combine results in that way? So just with some tiny helper function. Okay, we can use it. That's I see a value here. All right. And do you know that you may get you may do all your operations safely when you use that try catch bundled in your types like that, like IO either or task either. That makes sense. And so at some point you just saying, by the way, sorry, I cheated. We just recreated that package, and we may just remove all our code because here we have all the same code, all the same functionality, but even more, even better.
Thank you for the answer. Another question, a really good one. Is it preferable to use functional programming over object-oriented programming, or is there such a difference? Like, okay, of course it's different functional programming, but I mean, we keep doing object-oriented programming, right?
Yeah, this is so true. That's a great question. And no one forces you to pick one, in fact. So Flutter is pretty much object-oriented, and Dart is object-oriented focused language. So use OOP. But it's so easy to add some concepts from functional programming to our code base and just get benefits from them. I do not encourage you to just get rid of all classes and use pure functions instead. But you may just get the best from functional programming and use in your OOP code base.
Okay, there's this comment like, are you live writing or is it recorded fast forwarded because it was fast?
Yeah, like at the beginning of my talk, I said that I used a presentation body. It's an extension for VS Code that allowed me to make some snippets and just run them. So it's not pre-recorded. well, it's not pre-recorded video, but yeah, somewhere in between.
It was cool. Okay. With functional Dart, is there some similar as hooks in React Native?
Well, I would say that when, at least my associations, when I hear about hooks, I thinking about that package from Remy, like hooks widgets, and so you just use it like concept. So no, it's a little bit different concept when you just catch some values there, and functional programming is not really about it. When you hear functional programming, okay, if you want to keep just one thought after my talk, when you hear functional programming, let's associate it with either type, because all other stuff will get from that either type. This is wrong. Do not please reference me that I said that, but that's like just the basic understanding.
Okay. One last question from me. So we know that, I don't know if you know Kotlin. Have you ever worked with Kotlin?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they recently added result to Kotlin. Do you think that we will see some similar thing in Dart in the future versions? Kind of
I
an
really
either
hope so.
already built in. Yeah, we hope, right? I do too. Okay, well, this was really interesting topic, and if no one heard about functional programming before, I'm sure this will be really like help them to learn. And let's spread the word. Let's include them in more projects. I'm with you. Hopefully, we will one day see in many projects. And thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you.
Bye bye.